Chapter 1: The Gathering Storm. The October mist settled over Ravenshade Manor like a pale silk veil, softening the outlines of ancient stone walls and skeletal oak trees. The great house stood upon a lonely stretch of countryside in Sussex, where the wind carried the scent of damp earth and fading roses. Its windows glowed warmly against the encroaching darkness, promising comfort while concealing tensions that had quietly ripened over many years. Captain Arthur Hastings, recently returned from Argentina, gazed from the drawing-room window with quiet admiration. "There is something peculiarly English about a house such as this," he remarked. "One almost expects the portraits to step down from their frames after midnight." His hostess, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe, smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed fatigue. "One hopes they remain where they are, Captain. The living are quite troublesome enough." The remark drew polite laughter, but beneath it lingered an unmistakable unease. Lady Eleanor had invited a carefully selected gathering to celebrate the unveiling of the golden teardrop, a magnificent yellow diamond that had belonged to her family for generations. The jewel was said to possess extraordinary brilliance, fashioned into a pendant shaped like a single falling tear. Its reputation extended beyond England. Collectors across Europe had attempted to purchase it, yet every offer had been refused. Among the guests was Lady Eleanor's nephew, Richard Ashcombe, a handsome gentleman whose effortless charm barely concealed mounting debts. Beside him sat his wife, Margaret, whose graceful composure often appeared rehearsed rather than natural. Near the fireplace stood Dr. Julian Mercer, the family's trusted physician. His calm demeanor inspired confidence, yet Hastings noticed that he observed the company with unusual attentiveness, as though diagnosing more than physical ailments. Miss Evelyn Brooke, Lady Eleanor's devoted companion of 20 years, moved quietly among the guests, ensuring glasses remained filled and conversations continued without interruption. She seemed almost invisible, though nothing escaped her notice. There was also Victor Langley, an ambitious art dealer from London whose interest in antiques had brought him into Lady Eleanor's acquaintance only months before. His admiration for the manor's treasures appeared genuine, but Hastings wondered whether admiration alone explained his presence. Finally came Charles Fenwick, the family solicitor. Reserved and meticulous, he carried himself with the precision of a man accustomed to guarding uncomfortable truths behind carefully drafted documents. Dinner proceeded with impeccable courtesy. Silver gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers while servants moved silently between courses. Conversation drifted from politics to literature, from the weather in Scotland to recent exhibitions in Paris. Only one subject remained conspicuously absent: the golden teardrop. It emerged only after dessert, when Lady Eleanor rose from her chair. "My friends," she announced, "you have travelled far, and I believe the occasion deserves honesty rather than ceremony." She nodded toward the butler. A polished ebony case was carried into the drawing room and placed upon a velvet-covered table. Every conversation ceased. Lady Eleanor unlocked the case herself. Nestled within black velvet lay the golden teardrop. Its amber fire seemed almost alive beneath the candlelight. The stone caught every flickering flame, scattering golden reflections across the walls until the room appeared filled with tiny drops of sunlight. Even Hastings, who knew little of precious stones, found himself captivated. "What a remarkable jewel," he murmured. Victor Langley leaned forward with unmistakable fascination. "I have seen the crown jewels displayed at the Tower," he said softly. "Yet I confess this possesses a beauty all its own." Richard's eyes lingered upon the diamond longer than courtesy required. "So much wealth," he observed. "Remarkable that it should remain hidden in a country house." Lady Eleanor closed the case. "It has remained here because it belongs here." A brief silence followed. Then Margaret spoke. "There are rumors surrounding the diamond." Lady Eleanor regarded her coolly. "Rumors accompany every old family. They say," Margaret continued carefully, "that misfortune follows anyone who attempts to sell it." Victor chuckled politely. "Collectors adore such legends." "Legends," Lady Eleanor replied, "often conceal history." The atmosphere subtly shifted. Hastings noticed Dr. Mercer exchanging a fleeting glance with Miss Brooke. Fenwick adjusted his spectacles without speaking. Richard poured himself another glass of wine. As rain began tapping against the tall windows, Lady Eleanor dismissed the servants. "I believe," she said quietly, "the time has come to discuss my new will." The words struck the room like a pistol shot. Richard stiffened. "My dear aunt, surely legal matters can wait. They have waited long enough." Fenwick produced a leather folder from his briefcase. Lady Eleanor continued. "I have decided that the golden teardrop shall not pass automatically to the Ashcombe family." An icy silence settled over the gathering. Richard rose abruptly. "What exactly do you mean?" "I mean precisely what I have said." His voice lost its polish. "You cannot intend to leave centuries of family inheritance to strangers. My decision has been made." "You have been influenced." "No. You've been manipulated." Lady Eleanor met his furious gaze without flinching. "I have finally seen people exactly as they are." Richard's face flushed crimson. "You'll regret this." The drawing room fell utterly still. Outside, thunder rolled across the Sussex hills, and somewhere deep within Ravenshade Manor, a grandfather clock began striking the hour. No one noticed Miss Brooke quietly watching Richard. No one observed Dr. Mercer tighten his grip upon his wineglass. And no one could have guessed that before another evening had passed, the golden teardrop would vanish, and Ravenshade Manor would become the scene of a crime that would summon the incomparable Hercule Poirot. Chapter 2: The Crime. Rain lashed against the leaded windows throughout the night, while Ravenshade Manor seemed to retreat from the rest of the world. The narrow country road had become a ribbon of mud, and the ancient oak trees bent beneath the force of the wind. Inside, however, every effort was made to preserve an appearance of civility. Breakfast was served promptly at 8. Captain Hastings entered the dining room to find the company unusually subdued. Richard Ashcombe had dark circles beneath his eyes, though he attempted a cheerful greeting. Margaret scarcely touched her tea. Dr. Julian Mercer quietly read the morning newspaper, while Charles Fenwick studied a bundle of legal papers with habitual concentration. Miss Evelyn Brooke moved silently between the guests, her expression composed but distant. Only Lady Eleanor seemed entirely at ease. "The storm appears determined to keep us prisoners," she observed pleasantly. "For another day, at least," replied Dr. Mercer after glancing toward the rain-swept windows. Victor Langley smiled. "Then we must rely upon good conversation." Lady Eleanor regarded him thoughtfully. "Conversation has a curious way of revealing more than people intend." Richard laughed rather too loudly. "You seem unusually philosophical this morning, aunt." "I have slept exceedingly well," she answered. "One rests better after making difficult decisions." Her nephew's smile disappeared. Breakfast ended shortly before 9 o'clock. Lady Eleanor announced that she intended to spend the morning in the library reviewing several family documents with Mr. Fenwick before signing her revised will after luncheon. "I should prefer not to be disturbed," she added. Fenwick nodded. "I shall join you at 10:30, my lady." Until then, Lady Eleanor wished to be alone. The household dispersed. Hastings accompanied Dr. Mercer into the conservatory, where the physician admired a collection of rare orchids. Meanwhile, Margaret wandered into the music room, attempting a melancholy Chopin nocturne upon the grand piano. Victor Langley explored the portrait gallery with obvious fascination, pausing before every ancestral painting. Richard claimed he intended to ride into the village despite the weather, though the stable master later reported that no horse had left the estate. At precisely 10:15, the butler, Mr. Collins, carried a tray containing fresh tea to the library. He knocked. No answer. Assuming Lady Eleanor had fallen asleep over her papers, he knocked again. Still nothing. He tried the handle. The door refused to open. "It is locked," he later told Hastings. Believing his mistress simply desired privacy, Collins returned downstairs. 10 minutes later, Mr. Fenwick arrived carrying legal documents. Again the door remained locked. Again no answer came. A faint uneasiness settled over the corridor. Richard was summoned. He called loudly. "Aunt Eleanor." "It is Richard." Silence. Dr. Mercer soon joined them. "If she has suffered a seizure," he said gravely, "every minute may matter." The butler fetched the master key. To everyone's astonishment, it failed to unlock the door. "It has been bolted from within," Collins whispered. A heavy shoulder was brought against the oak panels. Once. Twice. On the third attempt, the ancient lock splintered. The door burst inward. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe sat motionless in her leather chair beside the library fireplace. At first glance, she appeared merely asleep. Then Hastings noticed the unnatural stillness of her hands. A delicate porcelain teacup rested upon the desk beside her. Its contents had barely been touched. The golden teardrop lay on the polished wood before her, blazing softly in the grey daylight filtering through the rain-streaked windows. Dr. Mercer hurried forward. His fingers found her wrist. Moments passed. Then he slowly removed his spectacles. "My God!" No one spoke. "Lady Eleanor is dead." Margaret gasped, gripping the doorframe to steady herself. Richard staggered backward. No, that's impossible." Dr. Mercer examined the body carefully. "There are no signs of violence." He lifted the teacup and sniffed cautiously. His expression darkened. "I fear poison." The room was searched immediately. Every window remained locked from the inside. The fireplace contained only cold ashes from the previous evening. No secret passage could be found behind the towering bookshelves. Most curious of all, the library key rested neatly inside Lady Eleanor's pocket. "It is impossible," Hastings murmured. "The door bolted from within," Fenwick agreed. "No one could have left." Richard stared fixedly at the diamond upon the desk. "It is still here." Victor Langley frowned. If robbery were the motive, why leave the jewel? No one possessed an answer. The local constabulary arrived shortly after noon under the command of Inspector Harold Bennett, a practical officer with little patience for mysteries. He questioned each guest methodically. Richard claimed he had been preparing for his ride throughout the morning. Margaret insisted she had practiced piano continuously until hearing the commotion. Victor maintained he had remained in the gallery. Dr. Mercer and Hastings confirmed one another's presence in the conservatory. Miss Brooke quietly admitted she had spent much of the morning organizing correspondence in Lady Eleanor's sitting room. The inspector listened carefully before making notes. "It would appear," he declared, "that someone administered poison before Lady Eleanor entered the library." Dr. Mercer hesitated. "Perhaps." Inspector Bennett continued. "The locked door merely delayed discovery." Yet Hastings could not dismiss a troubling detail. If the poison had been taken earlier, he asked, why was the teacup still warm when Collins first approached the library? The room fell silent. Even the inspector seemed momentarily unsettled. Before he could answer, Collins entered, visibly shaken. "There is something else, sir." "What is it?" The butler held out the shattered ebony display case that had housed the golden teardrop the previous evening. "The diamond may still be here." Everyone looked toward the jewel upon the desk. "But this case was found in the lake behind the manor only moments ago." Inspector Bennett frowned. Who would throw away an empty case while leaving the jewel behind? No one replied. Outside, the storm finally began to ease. But within Ravenshade Manor, suspicion had already taken root. Each guest glanced, however briefly, at the others. Each wondered who among them had lied. And somewhere, hidden beneath the elegant manners and polished civility of the Ashcombe household, a murderer waited with remarkable patience for the investigation to begin. Chapter 3: Poirot Arrives. The rain had ceased by the following morning, leaving Ravenshade Manor wrapped in a pale autumn mist. Water clung to the ivy that climbed the old stone walls, and the gardens, usually immaculate, were the untidy marks of the storm. Yet inside the house, another storm had only begun. No guest had departed. Inspector Harold Bennett had ordered that everyone remain at the manor until the investigation was complete. Though polite in manner, he had made it abundantly clear that each resident and visitor was to be regarded as a potential suspect. Captain Hastings found the atmosphere almost unbearable. Breakfast passed in strained silence. Knives and forks clicked softly against porcelain, but conversation scarcely rose above a whisper. Richard Ashcombe seemed restless, repeatedly glancing toward the entrance hall as though hoping for some miraculous interruption. Margaret stared absently through their windows. Dr. Mercer maintained his calm professionalism, while Victor Langley attempted, without success, to lighten the mood with remarks about the improving weather. Only Miss Evelyn Brooke appeared entirely composed. She poured tea with the same quiet efficiency she had displayed for 20 years, though Hastings noticed that her hands trembled almost imperceptibly whenever Lady Eleanor's name was mentioned. At 9:30, the distant hum of a motorcar echoed along the gravel drive. The butler looked toward the window. "A visitor, sir." Inspector Bennett frowned. "I am expecting no one." Moments later, the front door opened. A short, impeccably dressed gentleman entered the hall, removing his gloves with careful precision. His polished shoes seemed curiously untouched by the muddy drive, and his magnificent moustache was groomed with such perfection that Hastings smiled before the newcomer had spoken a single word. "My dear Hastings." "Hercule Poirot." The two men shook hands warmly. "It is delightful to find you here, mon ami," said Poirot. "Although, as so often happens, the circumstances are less delightful." Inspector Bennett approached. "You are Monsieur Hercule Poirot." Poirot inclined his head. "At your service." The inspector's expression softened with visible relief. "I confess I requested assistance from Scotland Yard yesterday afternoon. They informed me that you happened to be in Sussex." "Chance," Poirot replied gently, "sometimes performs useful work, though I prefer not to rely upon it." Introductions followed. Poirot greeted each member of the household with impeccable courtesy. He bowed slightly before Margaret. He exchanged a firm handshake with Dr. Mercer. He regarded Victor Langley with a brief but searching glance. When introduced to Richard Ashcombe, he observed something that caused his eyebrows to rise almost imperceptibly. "A pleasure," Richard said. "For one of us, perhaps," Poirot answered pleasantly. Richard looked momentarily puzzled. The detective's attention finally rested upon Miss Brooke. "You served Lady Eleanor faithfully for many years, mademoiselle." 20 years. A remarkable devotion. She was more than an employer. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "I understand." Without another word, he requested to see the library. The room remained exactly as Inspector Bennett had left it. Lady Eleanor's desk stood untouched. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. The broken lock still hung awkwardly from the damaged door. Poirot walked slowly around the room without speaking. He examined the chair, the teacup, the fireplace, the windows, the heavy velvet curtains. He even knelt to inspect the Persian carpet through a small magnifying lens withdrawn from his waistcoat pocket. Inspector Bennett cleared his throat. "I should mention that we found no footprints outside the windows." Poirot merely smiled. "I expected none." "You believe the murderer remained inside?" "I believe nothing, yet." He paused beside the desk. The golden teardrop. The great yellow diamond rested inside an evidence box. Poirot leaned close. "Magnificent." Inspector Bennett folded his arms. Curious that the killer ignored it. Poirot looked at him. Did he ignore it? The inspector hesitated. "The jewel was found exactly here." Poirot gently tapped the desk with one finger. "My friend, one must never confuse where something is found with where it belongs." Before Bennett could reply, Poirot picked up the porcelain teacup. He studied the delicate pattern painted around its rim. Then he smiled. Interesting. What is? Hastings asked. Poirot pointed toward the saucer. My good Hastings, observe. Hastings leaned forward. I see nothing. Precisely. Inspector Bennet frowned impatiently. Monsieur Poirot, perhaps you would explain. Poirot replaced the cup exactly where he had found it. No. No. Not until I understand why everyone has overlooked it. He turned abruptly. Now, if you please, I wish to speak with every person individually. The interviews continued throughout the afternoon. Richard admitted that he desperately needed money but denied threatening his aunt. Margaret confessed that Lady Eleanor had intended to alter her inheritance. Victor Langley acknowledged making several generous offers to purchase the golden teardrop during recent months. Dr. Mercer revealed that Lady Eleanor had privately complained of increasing anxiety, though her physical health remained excellent. Miss Brooke answered every question calmly, never once contradicting herself. When the interviews concluded, Hastings found Poirot standing alone beside a window overlooking the gardens. You have learned something, Hastings said. Poirot smiled faintly. I have learned many things. You know who killed Lady Eleanor? No. But you suspect someone. Poirot looked toward the lake, where the broken ebony jewel case had been recovered. I suspect, he said quietly, that everyone in this house has told me at least one lie. Before Hastings could respond, Collins entered hurriedly. Inspector. Monsieur Poirot. What is it? The gardener has discovered something beneath the old cedar tree. Inspector Bennet rose immediately. What sort of thing? Collins swallowed. A burned envelope. Poirot's eyes brightened. And? It bears Lady Eleanor's seal. A profound silence settled over the room. Poirot carefully adjusted his immaculate tie. At last, he murmured. The dead lady begins to speak. Chapter 4, Secrets Beneath Politeness. The old cedar stood at the far edge of the gardens, its sprawling branches casting long shadows across the damp lawn despite the afternoon sun. Beneath it, where the gardener had been clearing away fallen limbs from the previous night's storm, lay the remains of a small fire. Inspector Bennet crouched beside the blackened earth while Poirot observed from a respectful distance, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. There, said the gardener, pointing with his spade. I thought it was merely rubbish until I noticed the seal. The inspector carefully lifted the charred envelope with a pair of tweezers. Most of it had been consumed by the flames. Only a fragment remained intact. Pressed into the scorched wax was the unmistakable crest of the Ashcombe family. Inside, a few singed words could still be read. Cannot forgive. Truth must be known. Before the will. The rest had vanished into ash. Inspector Bennet sighed. Another mystery. Poirot gently shook his head. Not another, Inspector. The same one. The inspector glanced up. You believe this letter is connected with the murder? I am quite certain of it. Can you read anything more? Poirot smiled. No. But I can imagine why someone wished that no one else should. The afternoon became a procession of uncomfortable revelations. Charles Fenwick unlocked Lady Eleanor's private study at Poirot's request. The room contained orderly shelves of correspondence, household accounts, and family records extending back nearly a century. Everything appeared meticulously arranged. Everything, except one drawer. It had clearly been searched. Its contents lay in untidy disorder, papers folded carelessly instead of according to Lady Eleanor's famously precise habits. Poirot examined the drawer without touching a single document. Who searched this? No one answered. Fenwick frowned. It certainly was not like this before yesterday. Richard folded his arms. Perhaps the police. Inspector Bennet looked offended. My officers have catalogued every room. Nothing was disturbed unnecessarily. Poirot nodded quietly. Then someone searched this room before the police arrived. His gaze drifted across the faces surrounding him. No one spoke. Later, in the drawing room, Poirot requested that each guest remain while he asked several seemingly unrelated questions. Lady Margaret, he began gently, did your husband know that Lady Eleanor intended to change her will? Margaret hesitated. Not until the evening she announced it. Richard looked sharply at her. You told me you suspected it weeks ago. She lowered her eyes. I suspected, yes. Poirot inclined his head. So suspicion becomes certainty. No one interrupted. Turning toward Victor Langley, Poirot asked, Monsieur, how much did you once offer for the golden teardrop? Victor smiled awkwardly. £200,000. Richard let out a quiet whistle. I had forgotten the exact figure. Poirot's eyes rested upon him. Forgotten? Richard looked uncomfortable. I merely meant. You knew the amount. Victor frowned. I never discussed it publicly. An uneasy silence followed. Poirot merely nodded and made a small note in his pocket notebook. Dr. Mercer proved equally surprising. When questioned privately, he reluctantly admitted that Lady Eleanor had consulted him several months earlier about changing her medication. She believed someone had been tampering with it. Hastings stared. Surely you investigated. I did. And? I found nothing. Poirot looked thoughtfully at the physician. You believed her mistaken. I believed her frightened. That is not quite the same thing. No. Dr. Mercer sighed. It is not. As evening approached, another secret emerged. Miss Brooke requested a private conversation with Poirot. She stood beside the library window, watching the fading light over the gardens. There is something I should have told the inspector. Poirot waited patiently. I did not spend the whole morning in Lady Eleanor's sitting room. No. I entered the library corridor shortly after 10. Hastings looked surprised. You told Bennet you never left upstairs. I lied. Why? Miss Brooke's voice became almost inaudible. I heard voices. Whose? Lady Eleanor's, and a man's. Richard shifted uneasily across the room. Poirot noticed. What were they saying? I could not distinguish every word. She paused. But I distinctly heard Lady Eleanor say. Miss Brooke closed her eyes, recalling the moment. If you force my hand, everything will be revealed. And the man's reply. Then neither of us can afford that. The room became very still. Inspector Bennet leaned forward. Why conceal this? I feared I should ruin someone's life. Poirot regarded her kindly. Mademoiselle, murder has already accomplished that. That night, Poirot asked Hastings to accompany him back to the library. Their house slept. Only the grandfather clock disturbed the silence. Poirot walked directly to Lady Eleanor's desk. Without a word, he bent and examined the polished surface beneath a reading lamp. Then he smiled. My friend, what do you see? Hastings looked carefully. Nothing. Look again. Leaning closer, Hastings noticed the faintest outline upon the wood. A perfect circle. As though some small object had rested there for many years. But the evidence box containing the golden teardrop sat several inches away. It has been moved, Hastings whispered. Exactly. Poirot's eyes sparkled. The jewel was not found where Lady Eleanor left it. But why would anyone move it? Poirot did not answer. Instead, he reached beneath the edge of the desk. His fingertips brushed against something. Slowly, he withdrew a tiny object no larger than a shirt button. It was made of polished brass. Attached to it was a single strand of deep crimson silk. Hastings frowned. What on earth is it? Poirot turned the object over in his fingers. For the first time since arriving at Ravenshade Manor, his expression became unmistakably serious. "This," he said softly, "does not belong in a library." He slipped it carefully into his pocket. Outside, unseen by either man, a solitary figure stood hidden among the shadows beyond the window. The figure watched the light burning in the library for a long moment. Then, realizing that Poirot had found something never meant to be discovered, slipped silently into the darkness before either detective noticed they had been observed. Chapter 5: The False Solution. Morning broke bright and clear over Ravenshade Manor, as though nature itself wished to erase every trace of the previous day's gloom. Sunlight spilled across the dew-covered lawns, and the lake, which had swallowed the ebony jewel case, lay perfectly still beneath a cloudless sky. Within the manor, however, the atmosphere had grown heavier. Inspector Bennet had spent most of the night reviewing statements, comparing times, and examining every piece of evidence collected since Lady Eleanor's death. By breakfast, he wore the satisfied expression of a man convinced that the puzzle had finally yielded its answer. Captain Hastings noticed it immediately. "You seem unusually cheerful this morning, Inspector." Bennet folded his notebook with quiet confidence. "I believe the matter is all but settled." Poirot, who was delicately arranging the folds of his napkin, raised an eyebrow. "Indeed. The evidence has at last aligned." Poirot merely nodded. "Then I congratulate you." The inspector mistook the remark for agreement. An hour later, every guest was summoned to the drawing room. Richard Ashcombe entered looking exhausted. Margaret remained pale but composed. Dr. Mercer stood quietly near the fireplace, while Victor Langley and Miss Brooke exchanged anxious glances. Inspector Bennet cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that I have reached a conclusion." Silence filled the room. "The murderer is Mr. Richard Ashcombe." Richard stared at him in disbelief. "What? You possess the strongest financial motive. Lady Eleanor intended to remove you from her will. That proves nothing. You lied about preparing to ride into the village." Richard hesitated. "I remained in my room. The stable master confirms that no horse left the estate. I changed my mind." Bennet continued relentlessly. "Furthermore, Miss Brooke heard a man arguing with Lady Eleanor shortly before her death." Richard's face tightened. "So, you threatened her publicly the previous evening." "I was angry." "You also knew the exact amount Victor Langley had offered for the golden teardrop, information that should have been private." Victor looked genuinely astonished. "I never told him." Richard turned toward the dealer. "You mentioned it months ago." "I most certainly did not." Inspector Bennet reached into his pocket. "There is one final matter." He produced a folded sheet of paper. "It was discovered hidden inside Mr. Ashcombe's writing desk this morning." Richard frowned. "I've never seen that." The inspector unfolded the document. It was a page from Lady Eleanor's revised will. Across the bottom appeared Richard's fingerprints. Gasps echoed around the room. Margaret covered her mouth. Fenwick looked devastated. Inspector Bennet spoke quietly. "I believe you searched Lady Eleanor's study after her death, hoping to destroy the new will." Richard shook his head. "No. You handled this document." "I didn't. Your fingerprints say otherwise." "I touched countless legal papers over the years. But not this one." Constables stepped forward. Richard looked desperately toward Poirot. "Tell him." Poirot remained silent. "You know I didn't kill her." Still Poirot said nothing. Inspector Bennet nodded to his officers. "Richard Ashcombe, I arrest you on suspicion of the murder of Lady Eleanor Ashcombe." Richard offered no resistance. As he was escorted from the room, he stopped beside Poirot. "I lied about many things." Poirot met his eyes. "I know. But not about this." "I know that also." Richard was led away. The front door closed behind him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Inspector Bennet turned toward Poirot with quiet satisfaction. "I trust you now agree." Poirot slowly stood. "My dear Inspector." "Yes. You have arrested an innocent man." The room froze. Bennet frowned. "On what grounds?" Poirot walked to the center of the drawing room. "Because your theory requires Lady Eleanor to drink poisoned tea willingly after an argument." "So? Human psychology, Inspector." "I fail to see." "She had just quarreled with a man she believed was attempting to pressure her." Poirot paused. Would she calmly accept a cup of tea prepared during, or immediately after, that confrontation? Bennet opened his mouth. Closed it again. Poirot continued. "Furthermore, you assume the poison was intended for Lady Eleanor." Dr. Mercer looked sharply at him. "You mean?" "I mean only that assumptions are dangerous companions." The detective removed the tiny brass object with its crimson silk thread from his pocket. "I have also found this." Inspector Bennet examined it. "What is it?" "I did not know." "And now?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Now I do." He turned toward the butler. "Mr. Collins, would you be so kind as to bring Lady Eleanor's writing box?" Within minutes it arrived. Poirot opened it carefully. Inside lay fine stationery, sealing wax, several fountain pens, and an elegant letter opener decorated with crimson silk tassels. Only the tassel was incomplete. A tiny brass fastening was missing. Poirot placed the object he had found beside it. It fitted perfectly. Hastings stared. "The letter opener." "Exactly." Poirot lifted it. "The question is not why it broke." He looked slowly around the room. "It is why someone carried it into the library after Lady Eleanor was already dead." Every face reflected confusion. Except one. For the briefest instant, Miss Brooke's expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. Poirot noticed. He noticed everything. That afternoon, Hastings found Poirot alone in the conservatory, studying a white orchid. "You know something?" Poirot sighed. "I know that every important clue has been present from the beginning." "The teacup?" "Yes." "The jewel?" "Yes." "The burned letter?" "Yes." "The broken tassel?" "Certainly." "But they don't fit together." Poirot gently touched one of the orchid's petals. "They do." "Then why not tell the inspector?" "Because one piece remains missing." As if summoned by those very words, hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor. The butler appeared in the doorway, his usually calm face drained of color. "Monsieur Poirot." "Yes, Collins." "We have discovered another room has been searched." "Which room?" "Miss Brooke's." Poirot's expression hardened. "And there is something else." "What is it?" "The intruder left only one thing behind." Collins held out a small sheet of expensive cream paper. Upon it, written in neat black ink, were just 6 chilling words. "You are asking the wrong questions." Chapter 6: The Hidden Truth. Poirot accepted the anonymous note without a word. He examined neither the handwriting nor the paper immediately. Instead, he held it between his fingers as though weighing not its substance but the mind that had produced it. Hastings looked over his shoulder. "You are asking the wrong questions." "That sounds remarkably like a threat." Poirot smiled faintly. "No, my friend. It is something much more interesting." "What could be more interesting than a threat?" "A confession of anxiety." Inspector Bennet frowned. "I don't follow." "The writer fears my questions. Therefore, they know my questions are leading me somewhere." He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his pocket. "Come. We shall visit Miss Brooke." Evelyn Brooke's room overlooked the Easton Gardens. It was modestly furnished, almost austere, containing only a narrow bed, a writing desk, a wardrobe, and a bookshelf filled with well-worn novels. Unlike Lady Eleanor's study, this room appeared orderly. Too orderly. Poirot slowly walked around the room. He examined the desk, the wardrobe, the fireplace. Then he stopped before the bookshelf. "My dear Miss Brooke," he said gently, "you are fond of poetry." She looked surprised. "I have always been." He withdrew a volume of Tennyson. Dust covered every book around it. "Except this one. You have read it recently." Yes." Poirot opened the book. Nothing fell out. He smiled. "I did not expect it to." Inspector Bennet looked puzzled. "Then why examine it?" "Because someone else already has." Miss Brooke's composure began to falter. Poirot turned toward her. "You wished to tell me something yesterday." She lowered her eyes. "I was afraid." "Of whom?" No answer came. "You have been protecting someone." Tears gathered slowly in her eyes. "I promised." "To Lady Eleanor." A slight nod. "Then your promise ended with her life." Miss Brooke sank into a chair. For several moments she struggled to speak. Finally, the words emerged. "Lady Eleanor believed someone had been stealing from the family." Richard, who had been allowed to remain under guard within the manor until formal charges were completed, looked astonished. "Stealing? Not money." Miss Brooke looked toward the evidence box containing the golden teardrop. "Documents." Fenwick frowned. "What documents?" "Letters." Poirot remained perfectly still. "What sort of letters?" "They belonged to Lady Eleanor's late brother, Richard's father. They contained admissions." "Admissions of what?" Miss Brooke hesitated. "Financial fraud." Silence settled heavily across the room. Fenwick removed his spectacles. "I knew nothing of this." "Very few people did." Miss Brooke clasped her trembling hands. "Lady Eleanor discovered the truth only a few months ago while sorting old family papers." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And she intended to reveal it?" "Only if forced." Richard stared blankly. "My father. He forged investment records for years." Richard slowly sat down. That evening the detective requested every servant's duty records. Collins produced a leather-bound ledger. Poirot turned each page carefully. Meal times. Cleaning schedules. Deliveries. Visitors. Nothing escaped Lady Eleanor's household. Then, halfway through the previous Tuesday's entries, Poirot stopped. "There." Hastings leaned closer. "What is it?" "The tea." Inspector Bennet looked confused. "It was served as usual." "No." Poirot pointed with one finger. "Observe. The morning tray delivered to Lady Eleanor's library listed tea, milk, and 2 cups." Hastings blinked. "2." Inspector Bennet quickly examined the entry. But only 1 cup was found. "Precisely." A long silence followed. Poirot closed the ledger. "So Lady Eleanor expected a visitor." "Who?" Poirot smiled sadly. "That is no longer the correct question." Late that night, Poirot asked Hastings to accompany him to the lake. Moonlight shimmered across the water. The recovered ebony jewel case had already been examined repeatedly. Yet Poirot walked not toward the shore, but toward the old boathouse. Inside, decades of forgotten furniture gathered dust beneath cobwebs. Poirot's lantern illuminated shelves lined with broken gardening tools, fishing rods, and wooden crates. He stopped beside a small workbench. "What do you see?" Hastings looked around. "Nothing remarkable." Poirot gently brushed away dust. Upon the bench appeared faint scratches. Circular scratches. The exact size of the golden teardrop setting. It rested here. Hastings stared. But why? Poirot reached beneath the bench. His hand emerged holding a tiny object wrapped in cloth. Carefully he unfolded it. Inside lay a delicate gold clasp. Hastings recognized it instantly. It belongs to the necklace. Yes. But the diamond was still mounted. Poirot shook his head. No. He looked directly at Hastings. The diamond found upon Lady Eleanor's desk had already been removed from its original setting. Hastings felt a chill. You mean? The golden teardrop on the desk was replaced. Inspector Bennet, who had followed them from the manor, looked bewildered. Replaced. Poirot handed him the clasp. The murderer wished us to believe the jewel had never left the library. But why exchange it? Poirot answered quietly. Because the jewel itself was never the true object of the crime. They returned to the manor shortly before midnight. As they entered the hall, hurried footsteps echoed from the staircase. Charles Fenwick descended, visibly shaken. Monsieur Poirot. What has happened? I've remembered something. Poirot waited. Lady Eleanor came to my office 3 weeks ago. And she instructed me to prepare 2 wills. Inspector Bennet frowned. 2? One genuine. And the other? Fenwick swallowed. A false one. The room fell silent. Why? She said. His voice trembled. If someone is desperate enough to steal an inheritance, let them steal the wrong document. Poirot closed his eyes for a brief moment. Everything was falling into place. The poisoned tea. The moved diamond. The burned letter. The missing second teacup. The broken tassel. The false will. He looked slowly around the hall. Every suspect had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Each face reflected fear. Each concealed something. Poirot spoke at last. Ladies and gentlemen. His voice was calm, almost gentle. I now understand not only how Lady Eleanor died. He paused, letting the silence tighten around them. But why one among you has continued to search this house even after committing murder? No one moved. Tomorrow, Poirot would ask them all to assemble in the drawing room. There, beneath the watchful portraits of the Ashcombe family, every deception would be stripped away. And before another hour had passed, a killer's carefully constructed world would collapse forever. Chapter 7: The Gathering. At precisely 4 o'clock the following afternoon, every member of the household assembled in the drawing room of Ravenshade Manor. Outside, the autumn sun cast long shafts of golden light through the tall windows, illuminating the portraits of solemn Ashcombe ancestors who seemed to watch the proceedings with silent judgment. The storm had long since passed, yet an oppressive stillness lingered within the room. Inspector Bennet stood beside the fireplace. Captain Hastings occupied a chair near the window, notebook in hand. Richard Ashcombe, though still under police supervision, had been permitted to attend. Margaret sat beside him, her face pale but resolute. Dr. Julian Mercer folded his hands quietly in his lap. Victor Langley stared fixedly at the carpet, while Charles Fenwick repeatedly polished his spectacles. Only Evelyn Brooke remained perfectly motionless. Hercule Poirot entered last. He carried no notebook. No documents. Only a small velvet pouch. After acknowledging the company with a courteous bow, he remained standing. My friends, he began softly, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe was not merely murdered. His eyes traveled slowly around the room. She was deceived by someone she trusted. No one spoke. The inspector has labored diligently, yet the evidence appeared to contradict itself. Poirot smiled gently. But contradictions are often the footprints of truth. He turned toward Inspector Bennet. You believed Mr. Richard Ashcombe poisoned his aunt because he stood to lose his inheritance. The inspector nodded. It remains the strongest motive. It is a motive, Poirot agreed, but not the crime. Richard looked down silently. You lied repeatedly, Monsieur Richard. I know. You concealed your debts. Yes. You searched Lady Eleanor's study. Richard sighed. I did. A murmur spread across the room. Inspector Bennet looked sharply at him. You admitted it. I searched for the new will. Richard looked exhausted. I hoped, perhaps she had changed her mind. Poirot inclined his head. Foolish. Richard closed his eyes. But not murder. No. Poirot allowed the silence to settle. The search occurred after Lady Eleanor's death. Inspector Bennet frowned. Then why hide it? Because shame often disguises itself as guilt. Richard said nothing. Poirot slowly walked toward Lady Eleanor's writing desk, where several carefully arranged objects awaited him. The porcelain teacup. The broken brass fitting. The recovered gold clasp. The burned envelope. The evidence box containing the golden teardrop. My little collection, he said almost cheerfully. He lifted the teacup. The inspector assumed poison was placed here. He set it down again. But there exists another possibility. Dr. Mercer leaned forward. The poison was elsewhere. Poirot smiled. Exactly. The physician's expression altered ever so slightly. So you noticed? I notice everything. Poirot continued. The laboratory report confirmed traces of poison inside the cup. Inspector Bennet nodded. Yes. But only traces. The room became very quiet. If a deadly poison had been mixed into freshly poured tea, a far greater quantity would have remained. Hastings frowned. Then the poison was added. After Lady Eleanor drank. Inspector Bennet stared. Impossible. Not impossible. Poirot looked toward the library door. The murderer entered the room after death. He picked up the broken brass fitting. This tiny object proved it. He held it before the company. It belongs to Lady Eleanor's own letter opener. Margaret looked puzzled. What has that to do with anything? Poirot smiled. The tassel became caught beneath the edge of the writing desk while someone searched for something. He turned toward Bennet. That search occurred after death. The murderer searched the desk. Yes. For the real will. Poirot now lifted the burned envelope. Someone believed this letter dangerous enough to destroy. He glanced toward Fenwick. It referred to Lady Eleanor's intention to reveal an old family fraud. Fenwick nodded gravely. The letter was genuine. But incomplete. Poirot looked at the company. The murderer misunderstood it. Victor Langley finally spoke. You mean they believed it contained something else? Precisely. Poirot smiled. They thought it revealed the location of another document. He now opened the velvet pouch. Inside lay the gold clasp recovered from the boathouse. The golden teardrop. Everyone looked toward the famous jewel. It was moved. We know that, said Bennet. No. Poirot's voice remained calm. You know it changed places. He carefully lifted the pendant. The original setting had been opened. The gold clasp clicked perfectly into place. The murderer removed the diamond. Gasps echoed around the room. Hastings stood. But the jewel was found on Lady Eleanor's desk. Poirot nodded. A jewel was found. He held it up to the sunlight. The person responsible possessed sufficient knowledge to substitute an almost flawless imitation. Victor Langley's eyes widened. No. Poirot turned toward him. You recognized the possibility immediately, Monsieur Langley. Ideal in antiques. Indeed. But you also recognized something else. What? The imitation. Victor stared speechlessly. Poirot slowly returned the pendant to the table. Now we reach the heart of the matter. He faced the assembled guests. Lady Eleanor invited one person to the library that morning. He paused. The second teacup proves it. She expected a private conversation. Inspector Bennet nodded slowly. Yes. That conversation concerned neither inheritance nor money. Poirot looked toward Miss Brooke. It concerned betrayal. Evelyn lowered her gaze. I told you she heard a man arguing, Bennet objected. Poirot smiled gently. No. Everyone turned toward him. Miss Brooke told us she heard a man's voice. He looked kindly at her. But she never said she recognized it. Miss Brooke's lips trembled. I assumed. Exactly. Poirot folded his hands. The murderer wished everyone to assume. He stepped into the center of the room. The poison. The false will. The substituted jewel. The burned letter. The searched rooms. The anonymous warning. They are not separate mysteries. He looked slowly from face to face. They are one. Silence engulfed Ravenshade Manor. Poirot's expression became almost sorrowful. There remains only one question. Every eye fixed upon him. Inspector Bennet unconsciously held his breath. Captain Hastings felt his pulse quicken. Poirot raised his head. The person who murdered Lady Eleanor Ashcombe. His gaze settled firmly upon one member of the gathering. Is. Chapter 8, The Final Reveal. Miss Evelyn Brooke. For several heartbeats, no one moved. The words seemed to hang in the drawing room like the final note of a funeral bell. Richard Ashcombe stared in disbelief. Margaret gasped softly. Victor Langley instinctively stepped backward. Only Inspector Bennet broke the silence. Miss Brooke. Evelyn Brooke remained seated. She neither protested nor attempted to flee. Instead, she looked steadily at Hercule Poirot. I wondered, she said quietly, how long it would take you. Poirot bowed his head ever so slightly. You are an intelligent woman, mademoiselle. But intelligence rarely survives the smallest inconsistency. Inspector Bennet stepped forward. Explain yourself. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. With pleasure. From the beginning, everyone believed the golden teardrop was the motive. He gently lifted the famous pendant from the table. But Lady Eleanor had already discovered something far more valuable than this jewel. He looked toward Fenwick. She uncovered documents proving that her late brother had committed financial fraud many years ago. Fenwick nodded gravely. Yes. Those documents would not merely disgrace the Ashcombe name. Poirot's gaze settled upon Evelyn. They would expose another crime. Miss Brooke lowered her eyes. I had destroyed those records years ago. The room fell silent. Poirot continued. When Lady Eleanor began reorganizing the family archives, she realized certain files had disappeared. He paused. She suspected theft. She was correct. Poirot walked slowly before the assembled guests. 25 years earlier, Miss Brooke's younger brother had been employed as a junior accountant by the Ashcombe estate. Evelyn's hands tightened. He discovered irregularities. Richard frowned. I never knew. You could not. Poirot nodded gently. Lady Eleanor's brother persuaded the young man to remain silent. For a price? No. Poirot's voice softened. Through threats. Miss Brooke finally spoke. My brother refused. Tears glistened in her eyes. He intended to tell the authorities. What happened? Hastings asked quietly. He was blamed. Her voice broke. Every missing pound, every forged signature. She closed her eyes. They said he had done it. Inspector Bennet listened in silence. He was imprisoned. Poirot nodded sadly. And he died there 3 years later. No one spoke. Evelyn looked toward the floor. I stayed because Lady Eleanor was kind. She smiled bitterly. She knew nothing. When she discovered the truth, Poirot continued, she intended to clear your brother's name. Miss Brooke nodded. She promised. She also intended to expose the family scandal publicly. Yes. Richard whispered. She never told me. No, Poirot replied. Because she wished first to gather every surviving document. Poirot now turned to the evidence upon the desk. The morning of the murder, Lady Eleanor invited Miss Brooke to the library. Inspector Bennet frowned. But the second teacup was for Miss Brooke. Poirot smiled gently. The voice Miss Brooke later described as a man's. He looked at her kindly. Never existed. Evelyn closed her eyes. I deepened my voice. Hastings blinked. So there was no man arguing. No. Poirot shook his head. The imaginary man conveniently directed suspicion toward Richard. Miss Brooke whispered. I needed time. Poirot continued. The conversation began peacefully. Lady Eleanor told Miss Brooke she had located enough evidence to restore her brother's reputation. A tear rolled slowly down Evelyn's cheek. But there was one terrible consequence. Poirot looked around the room. The evidence also proved that Miss Brooke herself had destroyed records years before. Inspector Bennet frowned. Why would she do that? To protect her brother. Poirot answered quietly. She believed destroying the documents would prevent false charges. He sighed. Instead, it guaranteed them. Miss Brooke covered her face. I ruined everything. Poirot gently picked up the porcelain teacup. Lady Eleanor suffered a sudden attack of dizziness during their conversation. Dr. Mercer looked puzzled. Dizziness. Poirot nodded. Miss Brooke had secretly placed a measured dose of digitalis into Lady Eleanor's heart medicine several days earlier. The physician's expression changed instantly. The medicine. I examined the prescription bottle yesterday. Poirot looked at him. The poison was never in the tea. Dr. Mercer slowly nodded. The tea merely contained traces. Placed there afterward. Poirot continued. Once Lady Eleanor collapsed, Miss Brooke panicked. She poured a small quantity of poisoned medicine into the empty cup. So everyone would believe the tea had killed her. Inspector Bennet exhaled slowly. Good heavens! Poirot lifted the broken brass fitting. While searching desperately for the genuine wool on the remaining documents, Miss Brooke caught the tassel of Lady Eleanor's letter opener beneath the desk. It broke. The tiny brass fitting remained hidden. The smallest clue. Evelyn smiled sadly. I never noticed. Poirot turned toward the golden teardrop. You removed the real diamond from its antique setting. Miss Brooke nodded. I hoped everyone would believe robbery had failed. The imitation pendant came from Victor Langley's exhibition catalogue. Victor looked astonished. You visited my gallery. Months ago. Evelyn answered quietly. I commissioned a copy. Poirot inclined his head. The recovered clasp from the boathouse proved the original setting had been opened. And the real diamond? Inspector Bennet asked. Miss Brooke slowly reached into the pocket of her plain grey cardigan. She placed a small velvet parcel upon the table. Inside lay the genuine golden teardrop. Its golden fire seemed brighter than ever. I could never bring myself to sell it. Inspector Bennet approached quietly. Miss Brooke. She rose before he finished. There is no need. She held out her wrists. I shall come willingly. As the constables escorted her toward the door, she paused beside Richard. I am sorry. Richard looked at her with profound sadness. So am I. The door closed gently behind her. Silence settled over Ravenshade Manor. At last, Inspector Bennet turned toward Poirot. "I arrested the wrong man." Poirot smiled kindly. "You arrested the man who appeared guilty. There is a difference. There is always a difference." That evening, Hastings and Poirot walked slowly through the gardens. The setting sun reflected across the quiet lake, turning its surface to molten gold. Hastings broke the silence. "Do you pity her?" Poirot gazed toward the distant cedar tree. "I pity everyone in this tragedy. Even the murderer." Poirot nodded. "Vengeance is a curious poison, my friend. It begins by seeking justice." He looked toward Ravenshade Manor, where the windows glowed warmly once more. "And too often ends by destroying the very soul that carries it." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The breeze stirred the autumn leaves. Somewhere inside the old house, the grandfather clock struck the hour with calm, measured certainty. Order had returned to Ravenshade Manor. Yet Hercule Poirot knew, as he so often did, that the greatest mysteries were never hidden in locked rooms or priceless jewels. They were hidden within the quiet, wounded corners of the human heart. And those, he reflected as he adjusted his immaculate moustache, were the most difficult mysteries of all.